The rain pressed against the cafe windows in restless bursts, each drop a sharp reminder of the cold, gray weight draped over the city. The morning had no warmth to give, only the kind of damp chill that seeps into bones and lingers. Jackson stood outside for a moment longer than necessary. His cap was soaked through, and the frayed edges of his coat clung heavy to his frame. He didn't look like a man of means, just another weary soul waiting for a reason to step inside. His eyes moved slowly, scanning the interior not with the gaze of a customer, but with the quiet calculation of someone taking stock of a place that was once his dream. Inside, the baristas moved like clockwork, their hands sure, their faces unbothered. No one noticed him, not yet. This was store number 347, one speck in a sprawling empire of 800 locations. He had built this one with his own hands 10 years ago, back when names meant something and deals were sealed with handshakes, not contracts drafted by lawyers. Now, here he was, a stranger in a kingdom he had forged, staring through the glass at people who worked under his name without ever knowing the man who signed their paychecks. To them, he was an old man with tired eyes. They couldn't guess that by tomorrow, he might cut the cord on a $250 million expansion, ending dreams before they ever began. The thought didn't fill him with pride or guilt, just resolve. The bell above the door chimed sharply as he stepped inside. The air was thick with motion, orders being called out, espresso machines hissing, shoes squeaking on tile. In front of him, a woman in a tailored suit barked into her phone about missed flights and incompetent staff. Behind him, two college kids whispered over a single muffin, debating whether to split it or skip it entirely. Jackson welcomed the chaos. Every small gesture, every offhand tone. He absorbed it all like a man returning to an old language he hadn't spoken in years. His fingers brushed against the inside of his coat, finding the worn edges of a small notebook. Operation Ground Truth, he called it. No spreadsheets, no polished reports. Just raw observation. The kind you can only gather when no one realizes the boss is in the room. When his turn came, he stepped forward. His voice was steady, almost too quiet for the noise around him. "Just the $2 burger, please." The girl behind the counter, Maya, her name tag read, looked tired, but her smile was genuine. She didn't glance at his coat or hesitate at his order. "Would you like to add a coffee? We've got a combo deal that saves you a bit." He shook his head. "No, thank you. Just the burger." Behind her, two boys leaned toward each other, one muttering something with a smirk. The other laughed too quickly, the word cheap floating just loud enough to sting. Jackson noticed, but Maya either didn't hear or chose to ignore it. She moved with quiet efficiency, but there was warmth under her motions, a softness that didn't belong in a place designed for speed. That alone made her worth remembering. "Tuesday mornings are always like this," she said, wiping her hands on a towel, her eyes flicking to the restless line behind him. Jackson gave her a small smile, then took a seat by the window, the kind no one fought for. From there, he could see it all: the register, the drink station, the staff moving in repeating cycles. He opened his notebook. From the outside, it looked like an old grocery list, corners bent, cover soft from years of handling. Inside, however, were coded notes, quick impressions, and quiet judgments. He had built this company on instinct, not corporate trend forecasts. And instinct told him numbers could lie. Paper couldn't measure morale or dignity. It couldn't tell him what happened when no one thought they were being watched. When Maya brought his burger, she placed it down gently, as though it mattered. "Enjoy," she said, moving on without waiting for acknowledgement. Moments later, she was leaning over the counter to help an elderly man navigate the menu, her voice patient, unhurried. Jackson's gaze shifted to another worker, a lanky young man sighing loudly between orders, scrolling through his phone when he thought no one noticed. Everyone noticed. No one said a word. Then the front door opened, and a mother rushed in, juggling a stroller and two squirming toddlers. Maya crouched down to their level, asking their names, pointing out the dinosaurs on their shoes. The children laughed. The mother's shoulders relaxed, and for a moment, the noise in the room felt less sharp. Jackson wrote a single word in his notebook: anchor. Because in a place running on deadlines and caffeine, she wasn't just doing her job. She was holding something together that no training manual could teach. Maya moved behind the counter without fanfare, sliding into the register as another employee slipped out for a cigarette. No sighs, no eye rolls, just the quiet reflex of someone who filled gaps without being asked. When the rush eased, she didn't idle. She restocked napkins, refilled syrup bottles, and greeted a woman by name, asking about her husband's surgery. Every act was personal, unscripted, and unnoticed by most, except Jackson. From the corner of his eye, he caught the open break room door. The view was small but telling. 2 employees eating while standing, no chairs, no break, their bodies bent under the weight of exhaustion. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Board meeting moved to 3 p.m., expansion approval required. His gaze drifted back to Maya, who was still moving with unshaken grace. He closed his notebook. Not yet. He needed more than numbers before he decided the fate of this company. Minutes later, Maya returned with a small paper cup. "I noticed you were coughing a bit," she said softly. "Thought this might help." Her tone carried no obligation, only genuine care. Jackson looked up, startled, not by the gesture itself, but by how rare such kindness had become in his life. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice lower than intended. She nodded and began to turn away. He stopped her. "Do you like working here?" Her eyes flicked toward the counter before returning to him. "It's a job," she said after a pause. "I like helping people. The customers are mostly kind." Then came the hesitation, short, deliberate. "The company, they try, I guess." It wasn't resentment in her voice. It was the careful diplomacy of someone who had learned how to speak truth without inviting trouble. That answer told Jackson more than a dozen annual reports ever could, and more than he wanted to admit. He stood slowly, folding a paper napkin with deliberate care before pulling a $5 bill from his coat pocket, more than double the cost of his burger, and placing it under the plate. Maya noticed, her brows lifting in quiet surprise. Before she could speak, he met her eyes. "Thank you for the kindness, Maya." The way he said her name made it feel like it carried weight. Her expression faltered, not from the tip, but from the fact that he remembered her name. Few ever did. As he walked toward the door, his coat still damp from the rain, she called after him, "Have a wonderful day, sir." He paused for a half-second before stepping out. Kindness doesn't always echo loudly, but it can linger in a room long after its source is gone. Jackson lingered just beyond the doorway, the rain blurring the cafe into muted shapes. People moved with mechanical rhythm, orders taken, drinks handed off, names half-heard and mispronounced. Yet his focus stayed on one figure behind the counter, a young woman who hadn't forgotten how to care in a place that rewarded speed over soul. He pulled out his notebook and wrote slowly, "Protect Maya at all costs." What exactly are we expanding? Reach or indifference? For years, growth had been defined by store counts and profit margins, but this morning made something painfully clear. Growth without humanity was just a more attractive kind of decay. The notebook closed, disappearing back into his coat. Jackson wasn't just collecting observations anymore. He was making a choice, and the choice he was about to make wouldn't be found in investor decks or press releases. It started here, with a girl and a cup of water. Then, the sound of heels on tile cut sharply through the noise. 2 figures entered, Greg and Kelsey, regional leadership. Their suits were crisp, their movements exact, their expressions polished to a corporate shine. Maya's posture shifted the moment she saw them. Her smile didn't vanish, but it tightened. The kind of smile people wear when trouble walks in wearing a name badge. Their eyes scanned the room with the cold efficiency of auditors, counting seats, measuring signage, evaluating smiles like data points. Nothing in their gaze sought humanity. Only metrics mattered. Jackson had returned quietly to his corner seat moments before they arrived, watching now as the empire he built was being reduced to a checklist. Greg's voice carried above the ambient noise. Investor-facing walkthrough. We need perfect today. Jackson knew instantly. This wasn't a visit. It was a performance. And in performances, someone always pays the price. Orders grew rushed, movements sharper. A cup clinked too hard against porcelain as Maya set down a tray. Kelsey's gaze swept across the cafe, stopping on Jackson. His damp coat, his half-empty cup, the open notebook beside him. Her lips tightened, a blemish in her presentation. "Maya," she called, her tone cutting through the room. "Where's your manager?" Jackson met her eyes without flinching, though inside, the edges of his restraint frayed. He had written the values these people were now bending into weapons. Greg's voice rose again, loud enough for every customer to hear. "We've got someone sitting here for 30 minutes sipping free water. That's not the brand we're building." Before Jackson could speak, Maya stepped forward. "He bought a burger earlier," she said, her voice steady but gentle. Kelsey turned to her, tone clipped. "And you're defending that?" The moment stretched. Jennifer, the store manager, emerged from the back. Her eyes were tired, her silence heavier than words. She glanced at Jackson, then Maya, then back to Kelsey, and chose not to speak. Greg filled the void with corporate precision. "Customers like that lower total spend by 23%. We've got the data." Kelsey, already tapping her tablet, spoke without looking up. "Team lacks assertiveness. Poor customer filtration. Recommend exclusion from expansion tier." Maya's face lost its color. Jennifer's eyes stayed fixed on the wall, as if avoiding the scene meant she wasn't part of it. No one challenged the numbers. Compassion wasn't in the report. Jackson remained still, his pen moving in deliberate, unhurried strokes. The pages of his notebook, once a quiet record of subtle observations, were now transforming into something else entirely. It had become a ledger of decay, each line capturing the slow erosion of values he once fought to build. Here was a good worker, a decent human being, and somehow she might end up as the reason this store would be cut from the company's future. Not because she failed, but because compassion had been reclassified as inefficiency. That single truth was the clearest, most damning measure of what his company had become. Greg's smirk broke the air like a slap. "Come on, buddy. There's a McDonald's down the street. More your speed, don't you think?" His voice was loud enough for half the cafe to hear. Maya's breath caught. She opened her mouth, but nothing came. Across the room, Jennifer shot her a look sharp as broken glass, one that didn't need words. "Stay quiet if you want to keep your job." Maya lowered her gaze, her hands curling slightly at her sides. Jackson lifted his head slowly. His face was calm, almost too calm, the kind of composure that takes years to perfect, the kind that cracks all at once when it finally breaks. "I understand," he said evenly. Then, without hurry, he gathered his notebook and his empty cup. He had been pushed out of his own store, by employees he had once hired, by policies he had approved, by a culture that now felt like a foreign country wearing his name. Maya stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think you should go. They're really upset." Her eyes weren't pleading. They were apologizing for something she had no power to change. Jackson studied her face. She wasn't afraid for herself. She was afraid for him. He nodded once. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for being kind when no one else bothered." As he walked toward the exit, Greg leaned toward Kelsey. "Get his face. Next time call security before it gets this far." Kelsey nodded, already typing into her tablet. Outside, the rain hadn't eased. Jackson stepped into it without hesitation. No umbrella, no rush. Through the glass, Maya watched him go, her chest tightening for reasons she couldn't name. She had followed every policy, every training module. Except one. She had cared. And in this place, that was the most dangerous thing a person could do. Jackson didn't go far. He turned into the small bookstore next door, where the air smelled faintly of paper and dust. From a back corner table, he had a clear view of the cafe through a rain-streaked window. Inside, Maya was already back behind the counter, her motions smooth, controlled. Greg and Kelsey sat in the middle of the floor, staging papers, adjusting signage, and snapping photos for the board. The very table where Jackson had been humiliated minutes ago was now the centerpiece of their presentation backdrop. Reality edited, narrative rewritten. Jackson opened his laptop. One login, 2 layers of encryption. In seconds, he was inside the company's internal system. Live security feeds, email chains, financial reports, every artery of the organization laid bare. They thought no one was watching. They were wrong. He had seen enough from the outside. Now it was time to see it from the inside. Observation was over. The reckoning had begun. Greg, phone in hand, narrated like a tour guide. Here at Brixton Grounds, you'll see staff fully engaged, customers satisfied, operations running smoothly. Kelsey moved in behind Maya, adjusting trays and straightening signs. Smile, Maya. Just say something quick about how much you love the culture here. Maya hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the lens. Then, forcing the corners of her mouth upward, she delivered the line. We love working here. It's a great place. We feel valued. Her voice was too polished, too even. The kind of voice used to survive, not to tell the truth. Jackson's jaw tightened. He hit record. There it was. Fabricated joy, packaged for investors. A company selling a lie through the one employee still trying to live the truth. The camera couldn't tell the difference, but he could. A notification popped into the internal system. Greg to Kelsey. Subject line walkthrough debrief. Maya actually pulled it off. Girl's a better actress than I thought. Maybe we should move her to PR. A laughing emoji followed. Jackson read it twice, then again. He printed it silently. No notes, no reaction. Only the heavy certainty that this wasn't carelessness. It was culture, approved, rehearsed, rewarded. They weren't just lying to customers. They were lying to the entire company, to each other, to themselves. He opened his notebook and wrote, "They're not performing for the outside world. They're performing for us." He underlined it twice. The rot wasn't in the margins. It was in the core. Back in the cafe, Maya's voice was low. I just didn't want the man to feel ignored. Jennifer didn't look up from her clipboard. You're being too visible, Ma. Too personal. It's affecting the brand tone. I was trying to make him feel respected, Maya said, almost to herself. Respect doesn't show up in the KPI dashboard, Jennifer replied, colder now. Feelings don't drive numbers. Jackson stayed in the narrow aisle of the bookstore, the live feed still running on his laptop, the words, feelings don't drive numbers, echoing like a verdict. 4 words, and with them, 1,000 mission statements unraveled. This wasn't a careless remark. It was doctrine, a distilled principle that explained every crack in the company's foundation. He didn't bother writing it down. It was already burned into him. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in months. Patricia answered on the second ring. I need you to call an emergency board session for tomorrow morning, he said. No lawyers. No PR, just the board. A beat of silence. What happened? She asked. I've seen it. All of it. The reports are lies. Leadership's rotten to the core. We're not expanding. We're collapsing inward. Her voice lowered. Are you going to go public? I'm going to do something better, Jackson replied. I'm going to show up. He heard her exhale, sharp, but with relief hidden in it. I'll clear the room for 8 a.m. You'll have the floor. When the call ended, Jackson slipped the phone into his coat. The notebook was closed for good. There would be no more silent watching. Tomorrow, the story would be told by the man who built it, without filters, without disguises. That night, in front of the mirror, he shaved for the first time in weeks. The blade scraped clean across his jaw, each stroke peeling away not just stubble but the quiet restraint he'd been carrying. The man in the reflection wasn't the weary observer, with a damp coat anymore. He was the founder, the builder, the one who had something to say and no intention of being ignored. The suit was dark and pressed. The watch on his wrist had weight and history. Adjusting his cuff, he met his own gaze in the mirror and said quietly, "It's time." This wasn't a costume. It was a return to purpose. He had walked among them invisible. Now he would stand before them, undeniable. The boardroom was nearly full when he arrived. Conversations hummed low, coffee cups steamed, papers shifted. At the far end, Jackson sat in silence, fingers steepled, watching the room without giving away a thought. On the wall screen, Kelsey and Greg joined via video, all smiles and polish. "Everything's moving perfectly," Greg began, leaning back with practiced confidence. "Teams aligned, morale's high, operations are tight. You'll see it in the footage." Kelsey added smoothly, "The cafe we visited yesterday is a textbook model for expansion, one of our strongest." Jackson gave a single nod. Not one of them recognized the man they'd dismissed the day before. Not yet. Kelsey leaned forward. "Employee feedback is overwhelmingly positive. They feel supported and proud to represent the brand." Greg followed seamlessly. One employee in particular stood out, Maya. She said she's grateful for the environment we've created, called it uplifting. Jackson's voice was calm. "What's her full name?" The silence was immediate. Greg blinked. Kelsey's eyes shifted sideways. Neither spoke. "You mentioned her by name," Jackson said, voice flat. "Surely you remember the rest?" Kelsey opened her mouth, but no sound came. Greg fumbled with his notes. The boardroom air grew cold. Jackson reached into his leather folder and slid a printed still photo onto the table, grainy from the cafe's security feed. Greg towering over a seated man, face twisted with disdain. Kelsey standing beside him, arms crossed, eyes sharp and cold. The room froze. Kelsey's voice cracked. "Was that you?" "It was," Jackson replied evenly. "And I remember everything you said." One by one, he laid out more photos. Each moment dated, undeniable. The smirks, the insults, the dismissals. Greg's color drained. Kelsey's hands curled into fists before flattening against the table. Then came the printed email, Maya's unexpected camera charm. Greg's exact words, "She's a better actress than I thought. Let's use her next time we need fake warmth." Jackson tapped a button on the conference system. Greg's voice filled the room. "These low-value customers drag the brand down. Trash like that shouldn't be sitting here." Silence, the kind that presses into your ribs. "This," Jackson said, his voice steady but heavy, "is the culture you've painted in glowing terms, the one you say deserves $250 million in expansion." No one met his eyes. They didn't need to. The truth was laid, bare, printed, recorded, undeniable. He pulled out a final sheet of paper, signed his name at the bottom, and looked up. "Effective immediately, Greg Tillman and Kelsey Marlowe are terminated." Greg shot to his feet. "You can't do that. I have a protection clause." Jackson cut him off, his tone like ice. "Contracts don't shield corruption. They don't defend cruelty, and they damn sure don't protect people who lie to this board." Two security officers stepped through the door, already briefed. "Your access ends now," Jackson added. "Leave your badges. Don't speak to another employee on your way out." No shouting, no drama. Just the quiet, final sound of a company putting its spine back in place. Across town, Maya heard the ping on the tablet at the register. She almost ignored it. Just another system alert. Then she read the subject line. Promotion confirmation. Assistant manager. Effective immediately. Full benefits. Leadership track. Recognition for exemplary conduct. Her hand flew to her mouth. Tears blurred the screen. Jennifer stepped from the back, hesitated, then wrapped her arms around her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for staying quiet, for letting them talk to you that way." Maya shook her head, still crying but smiling now, wide and real. "Thank you," she said, voice trembling, "for not letting them take it all. It's not about the title, not even the benefits. It's about finally being seen." Back in the boardroom, Patricia's voice broke the silence. "And the expansion, Jackson. The global rollout." Jackson didn't hesitate. "I won't expand something built on pretense." The words landed like a gavel. Around the table, no one spoke. The decision was final. And for the first time in years, Jackson felt the company shift, ever so slightly, back toward the thing it was meant to be. Jackson's gaze swept the boardroom, meeting each member's eyes in turn. "This company can grow," he said evenly, "but only if its people grow with it. If our values can't scale, then it's the scale that's wrong, not the values. And if the character of our leadership can't carry this weight, then we don't deserve the reach." He leaned back, folding his hands. The silence that followed wasn't resistance. It was reflection. Because sometimes the boldest form of growth is knowing when to stop and remembering what must never be lost. The headlines came almost immediately. "The $2 revolution." A phrase coined by a local reporter, echoed by millions. Social media ignited. Photos of Maya at the counter, stories from customers who'd felt her kindness firsthand, screenshots from the boardroom, every detail spread like wildfire. People didn't just comment, they acted. A stranger paid for a stranger's coffee in honor of Maya. A single tweet showing a humble burger went viral with the caption, "Sometimes change starts with bread, eggs, and courage." Investors had braced for backlash. Instead, Knight & Company's stock rose 5% overnight, not from expansion, but from integrity. Jackson's gamble, choosing people over projections, had paid its return in trust. The world didn't crave more stores. It craved more stories like hers, more leaders who listened, more companies brave enough to say, "We were wrong, now we'll do better." Patricia, seated 2 chairs away, folded her hands. "What about the other branches, Jackson? What do we tell them?" "We don't tell them anything," he said, letting the pause hang before adding, "We listen." A few brows furrowed. Jackson went on, "Before we lay a single new brick, every employee in this company will have the right to speak anonymously, without fear of retaliation." He passed a folder down the table. Inside, a plan for a secure platform accessible from every register, every break room, every phone. "The ones closest to the ground see the cracks first," he said. "It's time we stop talking over them." This silence felt different. No longer the hush of caution, but the stillness of respect. For the first time, those who had always been watched would finally be heard. Jackson stood, voice firm. "Effective today, we launched the People First initiative company-wide." A few board members shifted upright. One tapped a pen. Jackson continued, "We'll begin with a full audit of wages, scheduling, fairness, and benefits. Every role, every region. No inflated reports, no filtered data. We want the truth, all of it." His gaze circled the room. Because people don't burn out from work, they burn out from being unseen. Every location would now submit verified reports based on direct employee input. No middlemen, no sugarcoating. A slogan had just grown teeth. People First was no longer an idea. It was policy. The media moved fast. Top executives fired after disrespecting customer and $2 cafe scandal. Greg and Kelsey's names became shorthand for corporate rot. Their sneers, their words, their behavior, captured and replayed, were now burned into public record. Inside the new feedback system, messages poured in. I stayed quiet for years. Today I cried at my register for the right reasons. I thought no one noticed the way we were treated. Now I know someone did, and one message Jackson read twice. I thought this company had lost its soul. Thank you for proving me wrong." These weren't just words. They were the first breaths of something long buried. Trust. It hadn't died. It had been waiting for permission to speak. Maya stood in the gleaming lobby, an invitation clutched in her hand. She had never been to headquarters, never imagined she'd be asked. An assistant guided her through quiet corridors and glass-walled offices until, finally, there he was. Jackson, not in a damp coat, but in the suit of the man who ran it all. "Thank you," he said, stepping forward with a smile softer than any title. "Not for your work, not for your patience, for not forgetting how to be human." Her eyes welled instantly. She had never cried in front of a boss before, but this wasn't the kind of crying born from fear. It was the kind that came when it finally felt safe. In that moment, it didn't matter who had built the company, only that it was now being rebuilt on the right people. Later, in his office, Jackson sat alone. The monitor hummed softly, displaying early results from the anonymous feedback system, graphs climbing, comments streaming in. At the top, one statistic blinked. 93% of employees report feeling heard for the first time. He leaned back, studying the number, then closed his eyes. It wasn't revenue. It wasn't market share, but it was worth more than any quarterly gain he had ever seen. For years, success had been measured in spreadsheets. Now, it lived in sentences like, "I told someone about my schedule. I feel safe speaking up." He smiled. Small, quiet, real, the kind that doesn't perform for cameras. Then came an email from store number 411, a cafe long forgotten in glossy presentations. He clicked the video attachment. The footage was shaky, handheld by a nervous barista. 6 employees stood beneath a hand-painted banner. "Thank you for seeing us." One waved. Another held a paper heart scrawled with "People First." No one spoke. They didn't have to. Jackson didn't move for a long time. His eyes stung, and a single tear slid down his cheek, not from guilt, but from the ache of knowing they'd been there all along, unseen until now. The news cycle shifted from reporting to questioning. Is this the new standard for leadership? Can a company still win by putting people before profit? One headline declared, "The $2 burger that restructured a corporation." At a leadership summit in Boston, another CEO stood and said, "Maybe it's time we stopped talking about culture and started listening to it." Jackson watched from his office, arms folded. He hadn't meant to start a movement. He'd just ordered breakfast. But now, the ripple was real, reaching boardrooms, rewriting benchmarks, forcing questions that mattered. He thought of Maya, of that moment she placed the burger before him as if it mattered. Because it did. If a $2 burger can start this, he wondered, what else have we underestimated? What else could kindness rebuild if we gave it room? Maya stepped back into Brixton grounds, her badge clipped high, visible, carrying new weight. For the first time, no one looked past her. They looked to her. The barista who used to smirk now nodded respectfully. The new hire straightened with quiet hope. Even Jennifer by the register offered a small, genuine smile. Maya gathered them close. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "You don't have to fake it anymore," she said. "Not with me. Not here." No applause followed. No music swelled. Just silence, the kind that comes when truth finally lands. She wasn't trying to be a hero. She was simply being herself. And somehow, in a system designed to flatten people like her, she had risen. Not by force, but by refusing to stop being real. An envelope arrived at Jackson's desk, hand-addressed, no letterhead. Inside, a single folded sheet, in neat, unpolished handwriting. "Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible. Maya." He placed it front and center on his desk, where the day's tasks would pile up. It wasn't decoration, it was an anchor. Looking out at the skyline he had helped shape, Jackson thought. I built an empire, but it was a $2 act of kindness that saved it. Sometimes the loudest legacies are whispered in ink. A $2 burger, An ordinary order, a truth exposed. It didn't happen in a press release or a scandal. It happened over the sound of a receipt printing, in a glance, in a kindness ignored by most. Sometimes the crack that collapses a system isn't a roar. It's a whisper, a moment of disrespect too small to measure, yet heavy enough to tip the scale. And sometimes the only one carrying decency in the room is the person no one bothers to hear. Not the loudest, not the best dressed, just someone doing their job without forgetting they're human. The system hadn't failed because it was weak. It had failed because it forgot how to feel. And all it took to remember was a girl named Maya and a burger no one thought mattered.